Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how to grow potatoes. And with growing potatoes, it's fairly easy, um, but do as I say, not as I do. The reason for that is I've kind of taken some shortcuts and some cheap ways of doing it. It's something I kind of do off on the side. But let me kind of explain a little bit about how to grow potatoes. Now, potatoes are one of the easiest things to grow, but one of the things that we also have to realize is most of us grow potatoes incorrectly. So even though we make a lot of mistakes on growing our potatoes or do things incorrectly, they tend to still do okay. So we can make a lot of mistakes and still get potatoes. But let me kind of go over all the key aspects of it. I've been growing potatoes for a long time, and I happen to have an old college friend who's from Lewiston, Idaho, and he's grew up growing potatoes, with his family and relatives and everybody else. And he had swung by when he was in town, and we got to talking about the garden, and he says there's a lot of things that people do incorrectly about potatoes, and I was surprised at all the things that I learned from him in the short time that we talked about it. But with the potatoes itself, when we take our potatoes, the potato pods or the segments that we use for planting the seed potatoes, typically the first rule of thumb is don't use the grocery store potatoes because they actually have been treated, and then they don't work out as well. So we should actually be buying our seed potatoes from actual places that actually sell them for planting purposes. Now, I'll be honest, I've never gone ahead and purchased those. I buy potatoes at the grocery store, and when they start, when the eyes start coming out, and some of them already have started sprouting, then that's when I go ahead and cut them up and plant them. But if you want to do it properly, the proper thing is to actually get this potato seed itself and get them at a horticulture shop or garden store or someplace that sells that, and you'll be a little bit more successful. Now, typically what I do is I take those potatoes that's been sprouting, and it actually is more beneficial instead of taking them and cutting them when they are the size of an eye. If we can wait around or have the time, wait until they actually start sprouting a little more. You'll be a lot more successful if they're already sprouting. So if they're already in a cool, dark area and they're already showing the eyes, go ahead and let it just kind of keep on growing before you actually cut them up and plant them. Now you go ahead, and whether you use a more of a trench system or you use container method of some sort, either side works. My understanding from the individual from Lewiston, Idaho, is that it doesn't really matter if you use a trench or use a container method. Both situations will work pretty good. So what you'll do is take those potato segments and put the cut side down, so the eyes will be going upwards. And you want to go ahead and bury them in a 6-inch deep hole if you're doing a trench. And then you want to space them about 12 inches apart on all sides. And between each segment, you want to sprinkle about 2 tablespoons of low nitrogen, high phosphorus fertilizer. Then cover both the potatoes with fertilizer with 2 inches of soil, and then water the soil well. Now, when you're going ahead and digging the trenches, you want to dig them about 2 to 3 feet apart in the prepared soil. And you want to plant those 12 inches apart, covering about 3 inches of soil, with the shoots reaching about 10 to 12 inches typically. Now, what you'll do is, as it keeps on growing its foliage, like it is doing here right in this picture with the 2 plants, you'll go ahead and, as it keeps on growing, you'll cover those leaves and cover those branches, because all up and down the branching system is where the little potatoes pods will start forming. And you'll just keep on burying the stems halfway. Repeat as needed throughout the growing season. Now, as I said before, spuds are easy to grow, but wise gardeners will benefit from preparing the soil, buying the right potato starter seeds, and then making sure that you do some basic gardening aspects with the potatoes, such as like most vegetables, they do require plenty of sunlight. Uh, the cold is fine too because they are hardy. And one thing about putting them out in the cold or on cold days is it does kill off the pests and the parasites. And majority of the places that grow and harvest and sell potatoes are really in cooler growing zones, right? Now, typically when it comes to the watering cycle, you're going to go ahead and give it about 1 to 2 inches of water per week. And the one thing I didn't realize is actually potatoes prefer to have deep nighttime soaking. And that means not shallow watering, but a deep watering, and do it at nighttime. So I've gotten in the habit of watering my potatoes right before I go to bed. Um, it is far superior than daytime surface watering. And also, you want to make sure it ultimately has consistent moist soil, which is vital to a good, healthy crop production. Okay. Now, like I said before, you want to pick an area where the soil is workable. Make sure that there's no frost, and make sure that it's getting plenty of sunlight during the day. Now, people ask, when should I go ahead and start planting my potatoes? Well, definitely after frost. But the old rule of thumb, actually, with farmers was that when the ground is workable and when the dandelions around your yard start blooming, then that's kind of an accurate calendar of when to go ahead and start your potatoes. Now, potatoes are a fruit slash vegetable that actually prefer a slightly acidic soil. So their pH that they're most optimized in is a pH level of 5.8 to 6.5. Now, the medium or the mean amount on a pH reader stick is 7, right? So anything above 7 is alkaline. Anything less than 7 is acidic. So potatoes do like a acidic soil. They also like to have good drainage. And if your garden area, whether it's a raised bed or garden area, has a lot of clay and rocks, you will go ahead and want to amend that soil before you go ahead and start working it. Um, Also, I usually go ahead and, for me personally, I'll plant my potatoes within 1 or 2 weeks of the last frost date. Just wait to see in case we get a last minute, light dusting of snow or really freezing temperatures. The one thing nice is the plants do get busy underneath the soil, and they won't show their heads until they can sense that the weather temperature is good enough for them to grow at optimal levels. Now, in areas that have long and cold winters, the planting time will be in early to mid-spring with a kind of a midsummer harvest. In areas with a more mild winter, an additional late spring or midsummer crops can be planted, but also an early harvest variety is a good option. And then, of course, in really very hot areas, people may plant one grouping of potatoes in late winter or early spring, and then they'll harvest it in early spring, and then they'll go ahead and plant a second fast maturing crop in mid-spring, and then late in the summer they'll do a planting for the early fall period. Now, like I said before, most grocery store bought spuds won't be viable for growing because they've been treated. I've only used grocery store potatoes that I didn't want to throw out that have already started showing the eyes and um, start showing a little bit of green vines and leaves coming out. But um, if you at all can help it, just go ahead and buy actual starter spuds. Now, in terms of the containers, this is where I told you to do what I say but not what I do. Well, I've been kind of cheap. Typically, what we want to do is use some sort of fabric bag. And if you get on Amazon, they actually have potato bags, genuine potato bags that are perfect and set up exactly the way you want to grow your potatoes. I went ahead and I happened to see a bunch of these kind of aeration type bags. They're more vinyl, plasticky. but they still aerate a little bit and they drain pretty good. I've noticed the soil does kind of dry out because of the aeration. A little bit of airflow goes through those. I think I got 12 of those colored bags for I think under $10, and so that's why I went ahead and bought them for my potatoes. In terms of using the plastic containers, you can go ahead and use them, but the problem with plastic containers are they don't help drain the potatoes as well as sometimes they need to. Sometimes they'll be too moist, and then on top of that, in the summertime, they end up baking the soil. And so typically, if you can use some sort of fabric bag or potato grow bag that is dedicated for growing potatoes, that's a much better system. I was just too cheap to invest in buying the potato bags on Amazon. But any system will work. Like I said before, you can get a lot of success and a lot of luck growing potatoes without doing all the correct things. They're very tolerant, so you can get pretty lucky growing potatoes. Now, like I said before on the trench system, as you plant those in the trench system into your garden area, make sure you space them out because they need a lot of space. And then you'll go ahead and as it continues to grow and it shows its foliage, you'll keep on mounding it over from the excess dirt on both sides of it and pile it up, covering at least half of the stem portion. So that way, every amount that you see, go ahead and cover about half of the value of that. I always leave a few leaves showing or a couple excess stems, so whenever I see the second set or third set of stems coming off on the side, I bury those. Now you'll keep on burying them, and it will keep on growing new spuds along the main stem level. Now, for individuals who want to go ahead and make sure that they are able to move their pots around or put them in advantageous areas where they're getting full sun, having the bag method or the pot method is a lot better for those individuals. And so whether you use the ground method or the raised bed method, or you want to go ahead and use the grow bags or the fabric bags, either system will work. You'll be successful. Now, you'll be able to eat tiny spuds as early as 70 days after planting, but typically most varieties reach their peak size and peak time to harvest about 95 to 110 days in range. There are some late season varieties that take about 120 to 135 days. But a lot of times I keep my potatoes growing all season long. And then as the plants kind of wither and dies and starts turning yellow is when I typically will go ahead, and that's when I typically harvest my potatoes. Sometimes, since I'm growing so many potatoes in different containers along the year, I'll go ahead and just check on the oldest planted potatoes and then just kind of see exactly where they look in terms of size. Now, going back to actual using containers, you want to use as big and tall of a pot as possible because you'll be adding more soil on top of in the containers. You'll go ahead and lay about 6 inches of soil, and typically if you're growing in pots, you want to go ahead and use potting soil. And I try to amend my potting soil with a little bit of compost and either sand or perlite to give it some aeration and drainage. You'll put in about 6 inches of soil. Then you'll go ahead and put the eye side up, the cut side down. And then you want to make sure the bottom of your pot has at least 14 inches width because you want to give it enough room because, potatoes will take up a lot of space and they don't want to be crowded. Now you want to make sure that your pot is a minimum of 15 inches tall because as you keep on adding more soil and burying the stem, it has opportunities to grow spuds along the way. Now, like I said before, good drainage is very, very important. So if you're using, if you take garden soil and put it in your pots, in your grow bags, that's not a good situation. You want to go ahead and use actual potting mix. And then I go ahead and amend my potting mix by adding compost or compost soil. And I add usually about 20% more in perlite or you can use a little bit of peat moss. I tend to like the peat moss plus perlite combination to give it aeration plus give it more acidity. So basically I'm adding, in relation to the potting mix, I'm adding 10% more peat moss and 10% more perlite. Now, I am a big fan of these fabric bags. Every single time I've grown anything in a fabric bag, because of aeration, because of good wicking ability without it overheating the soil inside of the bag, good drainage, anything that I've grew in grow bags have done really, really well. One of these days, I'm sure I'll invest in some potato bags, but for the time being, I haven't bothered to do so. Also, another option is these smart pots. Smart pots work really good for potatoes too. And so, like I said before, the soil is very important if you're going to do container growing or you're going to do a raised bed potato garden. Make sure it's rich in well-drained, loomy soil. A mixture of potting mix, compost added. You can either add 20% more sand or do what I do, which is about 10% perlite and 10% more peat moss. And that gives it the amount of acidity and good aeration and good rich soil that you're going to need to make your potatoes thrive. Now, the one thing you don't want to add, and I know some people have done it without knowing better, is you never want to add ash or lime to your soil. That will raise the alkaline level in your soil, and it's actually not great for your potatoes. So make sure you go ahead and avoid that. Now, the one thing that people seem to miss a lot is the fertilizing side of potatoes. At least 2 or 3 times during the growing period, you want to either add a liquid fertilizer, and if I add a liquid fertilizer, I use the Miracle-Gro water-soluble pellets that I go ahead and mix with a gallon of water, and I'll use that. You can also, if you have a foliar spray, you can do that, or if you have seaweed extract already, you can use that too. So whatever you want to use and whatever you have lying in the house is fine. But 2 to 3 applications kind of spread out through the growing season is very critical for having large size and healthy tubers. And so that's a little bit about growing potatoes. You could do none of those things that I've told you today and still have potatoes. But I've tried to incorporate all these things now that I know about some of the mistakes I was making in growing potatoes. And I do see that my potatoes are far larger in size. They're a lot healthier, and they taste great. And so the one thing I haven't done is, like I said before early on in this video, I don't go out and buy actual potato starters at the horticulture and the garden shop. I just take the potatoes because I seem to buy too many potatoes on a regular basis, and I end up being able to use the grocery store potatoes. But like I said before, those have been treated. So if you're going to go ahead and use them, let them not only eye first, but let them start sprouting a little bit of the green leaves and foliage before you go ahead and cut them and plant them. Because they've been treated, they may struggle to take off. And so then you'll end up having a container with a rotten potato, a cut potato inside. But that's a little bit about growing potatoes. If you have any questions or any other comments or questions you'd like to send me, go ahead and send that off to me, and I'll try to help you out as best I can. Thanks, and have a great day.